Well, welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. My name is Bob Bianchi. I'll be here from 12 to 3. Guys, we have some amazing stuff here. Police-involved shootings, the rewind of some of the most fascinating trials that we covered this year in 2018. As you can see there, we got Roy Oliver, Tremaine Wilborn, and at 3 p.m. when I go off air, they're going to be going over the fascinating Van Dyke and the cop cover-up trial. So let's talk a little bit right now and get right into Roy Oliver. It was a fascinating case. It comes to us out of Texas. Roy Oliver's 38 years old. He was eventually sentenced to 15 years in jail. We'll talk a little bit about that sentencing with my great guests that are going to be coming on. You see a picture of him right there. And this was as a result of him shooting a 15-year-old black teenager who was, by all estimations, not even argued by the defense, an impeccable kid. You may remember this case. This is where the cops are responding to a call out there for a house party where there was underage drinking. And while the cops were inside of the house, there were lots of kids both inside and outside the house. Shots were fired. Now, it was later determined that those shots came from a nearby nursing home. The officers did not know that at the time, and they ran outside. You see in some of the footage there, it was a really chaotic scene. Eventually what happens is officer at the time, Roy Oliver, winds up shooting into a car that is speeding away. Now, this becomes a big issue here. Shots are fired. People are going to run because many of them are afraid they're going to get shot. Oliver unloads around the shots into this moving vehicle, a highly contentious thing to do for a police officer, killing this 15-year-old boy. He went to trial and he got convicted, but we're going to break this case down, like I said with my guest. But let's just take a look at some of the body cam footage. And you know what? This could also not only be the cop shooting rewind section, this could be the power of motor vehicle recordings and in the body cam recordings that these officers have, because they were used in most of these cases, ultimately leading to convictions. Let's take a look at Roy Moore.
Hey, hamburger, come here. Have a seat. Where do you go to school?
West Mesquite.
All these West Mesquite kids? Maybe?
Wow, son of Mesquite. Pretty much all the time.
Listen, don't do this again.
Yeah, this is a one-time thing, sir.
Mr. Rhodes, I'm Officer Gross, okay?
Officer Rose.
I don't want to see this again.
Yeah, let me see this again. I ain't expected to get this
I don't.
tight.
Hey, stop that car! Stop right there! Stop! Stop! Copy 28. Charles Sam 7 Young 882. Charles Sam 7 Young 882. Hey, stop that fucking car! Stop that fucking car right now! That fucking car! You alright? Yeah, I'm fine. You were trying to hit you. Stop! Stop!
Compelling and chilling video right from the body cam. We're going to break that down a little bit with the guest that I'm going to bring on in a second. But you know what? This is why I love this network. You have the gavel-to-gavel coverage of the entire trial with experts, hosts, expert guests that break it down, who have actually been in the courtroom scenarios, know the trial tactics. No other network is doing it like that. But then we have an opportunity to go back and crystallize it and bring the most important pieces of evidence to do these kind of rewinds and break it down even more in a very crystallized way, as I said. But let me bring these guests on. You guys know I regularly appear on with my hashtag 4041, Gene Rossi. Gene was with the DOJ for 30 years. He's trained over 1,000 prosecutors. He has had a prolific career, and in the Department of Justice, there's actually a Gene Rossi war room in dedication for all the excellent service. Gene, a Merry Christmas and welcome back to the show.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Thanks for having me.
All right, awesome. And Francey Hakes, out of Georgia, another extraordinarily accomplished trial attorney, formerly of the DOJ, was also a state prosecutor. But when she was in the DOJ, she had done sex crimes as a state prosecutor. She was actually with the child exploitation, sex trafficking, crimes against children. I believe I have this right, Francey, because I really like to do some deep investigative work with my guests. You were the first appointed person by the U.S. Attorney General to lead a multi-task force, if you will, covering all layers and levels from local to state to the federal government in eradicating these horrible kinds of crimes. You've testified before Congress. You're a legal commentator and lecturer. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Guys, hey, listen, nothing more compelling than these, body cams. I note that when you see what happens here, we always say this, the cop didn't wake up that day and decide he was going to shoot and he was going to kill somebody. But they hear shots fired, and that's ratcheting them up police, obviously fear. They go out there, they don't know who the bad guy or the bad girl is. There's a car that's backing out of there, which can clearly just be people innocently trying to get away from that scenario. And you hear one of the officers yelling repeatedly, stop that car, stop that car, stop that effing car. And then ultimately, we know later on, Roy Oliver fires rounds into that vehicle, shooting the passenger, who was a 15-year-old boy, Jonathan Edwards, who by all estimations was just a model kid. Boy, this is just really a tragic case. I'll go to you first, Gene. What are your thoughts about, obviously, the power of that body cam footage, but moreover, the excitability of what's going on in that chaotic scene?
Well, I have 3 kids, and on New Year's Eve many years ago, one of my children was involved, safely I might add, in an incident involving underage drinking. And I can tell you this, the police officers, and they were great, but when you're dealing with teenagers who are immature and their thought processes haven't developed yet, you have to act a little differently. And this officer appears to have completely lost his mind and his temper.
Francey,
and he used to, yeah,
I'm sorry to cut you off there. Francey, one of the things that I have gone through the firearms training when I was prosecutor, because I want to see how they're trained. Now, obviously, it's a ratcheted up situation because a 15-year-old, an 8-year-old, an 88-year-old with a gun can still cause the same amount of carnage. But one of the cardinal rules about firing the weapon is not firing it into a moving vehicle where there were actually 5 occupants, and clearly, there was no testimony that the officers believed that they were actually the shooters. There was no weapon found. The argument was that he felt, Roy Oliver, that his fellow police officer was in danger, something that officer disagreed with, and obviously didn't fire his weapon. Shooting unfolded.
It's interesting, Bob. I mean, I tend to give cops the benefit of the doubt. I've certainly never been in a situation where my life was in danger like that. But listening and watching that video again, I think it was for the first time, I did hear Oliver say on the body cam, he was trying to hit you. I think that was the first time I've been able to make that out after listening to and watching that video so many times. It certainly lends credibility to his perception that the car was going to strike his fellow officer. His fellow officer didn't agree with it. And like you said, there was no sign of any weapons. He could not have known whether any firearms were in that car, whether that car represented a danger because of all the gunshots that had been heard. But still, I'm a little bit troubled by this case because what did he do? Just fired into a car because he felt like it? No, of course, he had to feel at least there was some threat. The jury obviously didn't agree, but I still think this case is quite troubling on many levels.
Yeah, shooting into a vehicle with 5 teenagers, not having witnessed one of them do this is a difficult thing. And I will say this, the Top Gun course in Jersey, I'm sure they have it in other places in the country, and when you go through the firearms training, you see cops who get complete tunnel vision when they're excited, when they're firing their weapons, and you show the tapes afterwards, and you wouldn't believe that they put people as actors with guns to the cop's head. The cop doesn't even see it happening, so their perception can be really wildly different from what the objective videotaped evidence shows. I've seen it happen, or it could be deception, as we've seen in other cases. So this case was brought. It was touted in the community as being the right case to bring, and we're going to listen to the prosecutor's opening statement and listen to how they laid this case out. And ultimately, and here's the thing that we love, when we do gavel to gavel, we never know what the end's going to be, but we know the end here was a conviction.
You'll hear evidence that all 5 of these shots, all of them, including the first one, were fired after the Chevrolet Impala had already cleared past Tyler Gross. No danger whatsoever, none. But the murdering spree continued. Even after the car passes the defendant as well, who was situated just a little bit to the south of Officer Gross, he continues to fire. He turns on a 45-degree angle to the southeast and fires 3 more rounds. There will be evidence of all of that, and you'll see. Again, all 5 rounds fired after that car has passed Officer Gross. No danger. No reasonable police officer, you'll hear testimony, would have engaged that car. No way. The kid's now panicked. The doll figures out fairly quickly that Jordan's been hit. The sadness begins to set in and the panic, fear. They drive 2 roads over to Bishop Lane. They make a right, going back to the west. They don't know what to do. They're teenagers. They're kids. Meanwhile, Officer Jeremy Chandler, acting very honorably that night, I might add, deploys over to Bishop. He's heard the first call of shots fired. He thinks that he has to do a felony stop because he doesn't know what exactly has transpired up by the nursing home. You're going to hear evidence that those 12 shots were fired by a man named Tupac. That's his street name. His real name is DeMichael Rose. I'm going to tell you how you're going to hear that in a moment. You're also going to hear that all 12 of those shots were fired after the 5 kids were already in the car, so that none of them could possibly have been involved in any of that.
Okay, so basically the prosecutor is saying, and he used the word, it's what ultimately the court will charge the jury, it was not reasonable. No reasonable officer would have shot inside of that vehicle. Now, something that was very interesting here, we're not going to get an opportunity to comment on with Gene Rossi because we don't want his blood pressure to get too high, is that the defense chose not to do an opening in the case, which I think is a very, very bad idea, especially in any case, but especially a cop case. So that's basically what went on there with regard to the opening statements, but there was also testimony that came out from kids that were in the vehicle, the other kids who survived the shooting of Roy Oliver. We're going to get to that fascinating testimony on the other end of the break. Stay with us. All right, so there's a testimony of Vidal Allen, the victim's stepbrother, who was driving that vehicle. It's very, very important to watch how this whole thing can develop. Cops are going out there, there's gunshots, they hear them, they don't know where the gunshots are coming from. And here's what, you've listened to the previous testimony of Jeremy Seaton saying, we wanted to get in our car, stay out of trouble, not have anybody think it's us. They thought that there was safety and protection in the vehicle. But Vidal Allen is giving testimony that they did not know that this was a police officer by the language he was using. Stop that effing car. He didn't know whether they were under attack or not. They started to back out. It happened in an instant, and gunshots were fired, and they didn't see a police officer. They just saw a light shining in his face, Vidal Allen says, which he believed to be a scope or a light that comes from an AR-15 weapon. So it was shining in his face. So that's the picture that they're creating. They think that they're under attack and don't understand understand that these are police officers. So we have one more quick clip I want to show to you. Maxwell Everett, he's a friend of the victim, and he's going to testify for the prosecution about when they realized that Jordan, 15 years old, never been in trouble, great kid by the estimations of everybody in faith-based communities and in the school, lie dead after having been shot by Roy Oliver. Let's take a look.
Like that. So then we stayed there, but like we turned like back facing the road that we came from, like the main road.
Shepherd?
Yes, sir. Like that road. We turned facing that road, and then that was when the cop came back down the road to
Did y'all whack that police car over?
Yes, sir.
Why'd you do that?
Because like we knew Jordan needed help.
You knew Jordan needed help.
Yes, sir.
What happened then?
Then the cop had stopped behind us, and then VDOT was telling him like Jordan was like hurt.
Let's call the police officer, not a cop, okay?
Yes, sir.
All right.
And then he was telling the police officer that Jordan was hurt, and then he was like, okay, like we're gonna get help for y'all. And then
When you say he was like, you mean the police officer that's down there?
Yes, sir.
Did he tell you to stick your hands out of the car?
Yes, sir.
Did you do that?
Yes, sir.
Eventually, did you get pulled out of that car?
Yes, sir.
You did that on your own volition?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Were you the first or the second person to come out of the car?
Second, I believe. Second.
After the driver?
Yes, sir.
And what were the instructions that were given to you?
Walk backwards with your hands up.
And so did you do that?
Yes, sir.
And were you placed on your knees?
Yes, sir.
Handcuffed?
Yes, sir.
Now, you were behind the all out, correct?
Yes, sir.
So your view of the officers and the shots would have been obscured by Kavan and by Maximus, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you didn't have that good of a view the whole time?
Yeah, no, sir. I have to.
Figured out that Jordan had been shot. How'd that make you feel?
I was shocked. Like I ain't know. Like at first, like since he had like bought that red drink from the store, I had thought that he spilled his drink, but like it wasn't. He didn't spill his drink. Like that's what I really thought. Like for real. So then once I seen that, like.
Are you going to be able to keep going, son? Okay. Jordan was a good friend of yours, wasn't he? Max? Right? Listen. Were you in fear of your life when those shots were fired, Maxwell? Can you answer my question, Maxwell?
Yes, sir. I was.
Roy Oliver case, police officer on trial for shooting and killing a 15-year-old boy, Jonathan Edwards. We've listened to a number of the kids that were inside the vehicle. That was Maxwell Everett, friend of the victim, getting very emotional when he talks about after the shooting, and they're basically being kind of taken out of the car. He notices that Jonathan Edwards has red all over him, and he thought it was from a red soft drink that he had bought earlier, obviously recognizing it's not, and having a very difficult emotional time on the stand. So, Francey, I mean, these three witnesses that were in the vehicle talking about, from their perspective, what they thought was going on, I think were very good prosecution witnesses because, you know what? The cops are supposed to be more controlled before you start firing randomly into a vehicle.
Yeah, Bob, you know, I thought the most significant evidence right then was, while the last witness was emotional, I thought the most significant evidence for a jury was the driver talking about the light in his eyes and it's nighttime and the police being behind the light and him being unable to see that it's a police officer giving him a command. Why wasn't Oliver shouting, "Stop police, which you know they're trained to do? I thought that was very significant, and it was very credible that the child said, you know, he thinks there are scope lights like that on AR-15s. They might have been under attack, and that's why they weren't obeying the commands, because they couldn't identify that those commands were from a police officer. Absolutely emotional testimony from all of them.
Francey, that's a great point that you bring up there. And, you know, Gene, I also noticed that when that's going on, you see people running all over. You see another car that's actually peeling away behind the vehicle where the officer eventually shoots in it. But what are your thoughts about what Francey is indicating, that the command was a fallacy, that given a situation of pandemonium like this, the lights being shined on the guy's eye, people yelling, "Stop that effing car," he basically says kind of what Francey's saying. He wouldn't expect a cop to be speaking that way. What are your thoughts?
Well, first off, Francey's from the elite CIOSC of the U.S. DOJ. So her comment is brilliant. I had a case that I supervised, and it was four police officers, and the defendant was saying, "I didn't know they were police officers." Well, it gets to Francine's point. At the trial, each of the officers said on multiple occasions, I said, "Police, stop. Police, stop." And the other thing is this. I'm Italian, so I'm not unfamiliar with the F word. But I got to tell you, that witness, the second witness who said, "I didn't think it was a police officer because he's using the F word," I agree. A professional police officer says, "Stop, police." You don't have to use profanity. Not that it's never used, but you're trying to have kids respond to your command, and this officer really went out of line, very out of line.
Right. Excellent points by both of you, which is not surprising. And I see you DOJ guys kind of stick together there when you're giving your little recitations. That's
like that.
That's right, me and Gene.
All right.
What?
Rossi's still the OG, though. I mean, let's be very honest here. He's got the Rossi war room.
He's definitely far older than I am, I think is what you're saying, Bob.
Definitely. All right, listen, guys, let's not forget the context of this case now. The defense is going to be by Roy Oliver that he was shooting because they were worried, he was in fear of his fellow officer getting actually run over by the vehicle. That's Tyler Gross. So Tyler Gross is a police officer that's going to take the stand for team prosecution. It can't get better than that. This could be a really compelling witness for the prosecution. We'll get to it on the other end of the break. Texas versus Roy Oliver, a case we covered extensively, gavel to gavel. We have crystallized that case down to the most important components. We're in the prosecution case right now. We heard 3 riveting statements from people that were inside the vehicle where the 15-year-old boy, Jonathan Edwards, was shot and killed. Now remember, it's important to remember that there was an argument that Roy Oliver shot him because he felt that his fellow police officer, Tyler Gross, was in danger of potentially being run over and that he did it in defense of the officer. But the officer testified at trial. Did he feel like he was in danger? Let's check it out.
And so what happened over the next 54 seconds? Describe that.
I heard several loud pops. It sounded like appeared to be gunfire to me. I exited the house. I proceeded eastbound on Barron Drive. The kids that had ran out of the house and went eastbound on Barron Drive were then running back westbound on Barron Drive back to the house and screaming. I stopped the vehicle that was turning around in the middle of the road. They complied. I continued eastbound on Barron Drive, where I observed several kids cowering in between houses. Vehicle I observed another vehicle that started backing away from me on Barron Drive towards the end. I yelled for it to stop. I shone my flashlight on it, and then I yelled for it to stop. I began reading its license plate. On the second iteration of this license plate over the radio, I realized that the vehicle was then attempting to evade and to identify the vehicle just in case it was the suspect, the shooter, or any reason at all. At that point, I realized that it was trying to evade me and not just backing up.
Did the car eventually stop up on Shepherd?
Yes.
Was it facing south?
Yes.
And then you reached the car, and tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury where you were when you finally got in the car.
Do you want me to skip the part where it turned, or do you want me to just start back where I was at?
Yes.
Okay, so then I read the license plate twice. On the second iteration of reading the license plate, I realized the vehicle was attempting to evade instead of just backing up. I then began telling him to stop the car. And at that point, I walked up. The vehicle had backed up and then backed north onto Shepherd. So from eastbound Barron to northbound Shepherd, as it backed up like this, I stepped up onto Shepherd Road ahead of the vehicle, and the vehicle then stopped briefly. I thought it was going to stop. I continued towards the vehicle, then accelerated forward, driving past me. I then reached out and I hit the vehicle, which broke the rear passenger window. Immediately after that, I heard a series of gunshots as the vehicle then traveled down south on Shepherd. I then turned and saw that Oliver was standing next to me, and I saw the smoke from his weapon. I then
What did you conclude from the smoke coming from his weapon?
That he was the one that had shot.
Did you ever feel like that the Doll Allen driver of that car was trying to drive over you or hit you?
I didn't. I was not in fear at that point.
Okay, testifying for the prosecution is Tyler Gross. This is Roy Oliver. He's basically going over what he was perceiving at the scene. Francey, he makes a comment that they asked him to stop. He was putting the license plate number through the radio transmission in case they were the suspects in the shooting that they had heard when they were inside the building. He then uses the word a couple of times that the car tried to evade. And again, it's funny how we can spin these words instead of just backing up, and then he heard gunshots. So he's right there witnessing all of this. And to me, the biggest point that he's bringing up there is that in case it was the suspect shooter, showing you really don't know when you went out there who was the shooter.
Well, that's right, Bob. And this testimony wasn't quite as damaging to the defendant as I would have otherwise thought it might be when he said he wasn't in fear, because he places himself right at the rear corner of the vehicle, so close that he strikes it and breaks something on it. He talks about the vehicle evading him. These things are things that could bolster the defense case that the perception of Officer Oliver was that this officer was in danger. Regardless of that officer's own feeling of danger, it's really a matter of what is a reasonable officer in the position of Oliver, what is his right to do with respect to deadly force? If he reasonably perceived that his fellow officer was in danger, did he have the right to use deadly force? Of course, that's the question.
And Francey, that it's not only just a reasonable perception, it doesn't have to be right, it just has to be reasonable. That was such a complete answer that I am going to take the Gene Rossi War Room guy, hashtag 4041, get to him on the other side of a break, because we still have more of Officer Tyler Gross's testimony. It's powerful testimony. We'll be back on the other end.
So if somebody said they only saw the bald officer and never saw you in that vehicle, that would be something of you were between Roy and the vehicle, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you're the one that had the flashlight and was making the clear commands?
Yes, sir.
Were you wearing a jacket or a windbreaker or anything, or were you in that type of uniform?
No, I was in this this type of uniform.
You've made statements to the Dallas County Sheriff's Department along the lines that the vehicle hit you, it was just going to continue to drive. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Anything change your mind on that today?
No.
Recall he could have hit me, and I wasn't in fear so much as that I shot, but I was in fear?
I was in fear the vehicle was close to me. I didn't think the vehicle was trying to run me over.
And when we look at this, one has to look at the perception of being charged in the crime. You didn't get charged with anything, correct?
That's correct.
Though you were read, basically, they're warnings for a suspect, but they're the Miranda warnings. You got it, grand jury. Did your vantage point, you would agree with me, is different than Officer Oliver's?
Yes.
You were close enough to the vehicle that you're closer than a yardstick away from the vehicle at the time you break the glass?
Yes.
And while I think your testimony at the grand jury and with Detective Carranza and your statement that you've written is that simultaneously to the glass breaking, Officer Oliver discharged his weapon.
Yes.
So if that's a simultaneous event, then you're still near the vehicle or alongside of it, correct?
Yes. I was. It was moving fast. As soon as it took off forward, it was fast. It slow, and then it took off fast, accelerated fast. So immediately after the window broke, I was probably at least at the rear tail lights towards the end of the trunk, but not past me all the way.
Okay, that's Tyler Gross. Gene, this was cross-examination by the defense lawyer. And this idea that came out towards the end, that did you think that the motor vehicle was trying to run you over, he said no. But remember, he's in between the vehicle and Roy Oliver who shoots. So he's got a better vantage point and Roy Oliver doesn't. Then this window breaks, the glass breaks. Who knows what that sounds like? The glass is breaking, the car's backing up, and that, he says, is when Oliver fires. I think it's a pretty good line of cross.
I think it's an excellent line across, and I want to compliment Francine because you got to look into the brain of Mr. Oliver. Forget Tyler Gross. It doesn't matter that he's not afraid. It's what's in his head. He's on the screen because that's the jury question. I got to tell you this. If I see a car that's backing up and my partner is between me and the car and I hear glass, and you got to make a split-second decision. Could that glass be breaking because they popped it with a gun and are getting ready to shoot my partner?
Yes.
So you got all this going on here, and I don't think it was a very good witness for the prosecution, or as good as you could have.
Now, Francine, in like 15 or less seconds, you got young boys, he said. He believed they could hear the commands, but then you could see where this confusion comes in because they didn't identify themselves as the police, as we said before. And then this window gets shattered, lights in these kids' face. You could just see how this was a perfect storm of misperception by both sides.
It really was, but Gene is absolutely right that this witness made Officer Oliver's actions look reasonable.
Okay, well, listen, guys, you're giving great analysis. I know that you guys want to keep saying that. I think Gene is great. I think Francie's great. That's why every now and again you can throw one my way, give me a little love. Roy Oliver, the defendant's coming up. We're going to take that on the other end of this break. We are in a Law and Crime rewind. How appropriate. The season of 2018 is coming to a conclusion. We've covered some of the most fascinating trials, gavel to gavel. We've crystallized some of the most important ones for you. We're doing Roy Oliver right now, a police officer out of Texas. This occurred on, there he is right there, April 29, 2017, where the cops go to a house party because of underage drinking. You see the house right there. While the cops are inside the house, shots are fired. The cops run out. It's pandemonium. Teenage kids are running all over the place. It turns out the shots were fired weren't from the kids at the party. It was from a nursing home nearby. Nevertheless, we've been listening all day to the crystallized testimony of the officer, Roy Oliver in particular, sees a car backing up. We listened to the kids that were inside the car. Ultimately, Jonathan Edwards was inside that car, 15 years old, good kid, faith-based community loves the kid, school loves the kid. Look at that, a smile that could light up any room. He winds up dead inside of that vehicle, and Roy Oliver winds up on trial. We listened to the victim's friends that were in the car testify, and we recently got done listening to a police officer who was indicating what was happening when Roy Oliver, in fact, fired those shots, and that officer was actually in between Oliver and that vehicle when the shots were fired. But let's do a little bit of a rewind on the rewind and go to the body cam footage, because I think you guys who may have just joined us need to see it. It never gets old because it shows you on how some misinterpretation of facts and in a pandemonium scene, a beautiful 15-year-old boy can be killed.
Hey, Hamburger, come here. Have a seat. Where do you go to school?
West Mesquite.
All these West Mesquite kids? Maybe?
Wow, some of them Mesquite. Pretty much all the time.
Listen, don't do this again.
Yeah, this is a one-time thing, sir.
Mr. Rhodes, I'm Officer Gross, okay?
Officer Gross.
I don't want to see this again.
Yeah, let me see this again. I ain't expected to get this tight.
Hey, stop that car! Stop right there! Stop!
60, 61, 7, 23, 12, 64, 62, 84. That board, truck came around somewhere in the center area. Nursing home.
Stop! Copy 28. Charles Sam 7 Young 882. Charles Sam 7 Young 882. Hey, stop that fucking car! Stop that fucking car right now! That fucking car! You alright? Yeah, I'm fine. We were trying to hit you.
64, Black Cat, southbound, Shepherd. Turn on to Goodbye. Station 1.
Stop! Stop!
Wow, man, that is some fascinating, body cam video. So when they had the officer that was in the room and ran out and was saying, stop that car, that's Tyler Gross. We went through his testimony before. Essentially, he's saying that he could tell that they were young boys. He believed they could hear their commands. He did not believe that he was going to get hit by the vehicle. That's very important because Roy Oliver is indicating that he fired those shots past the fellow officer into the vehicle of these 5 young teenagers, having killed one, because he believed that Tyler was in danger of being hit by the vehicle. And, you find a very interesting thing after the shots are fired. One of the first things you hear, and it turns out to be Officer Oliver, is telling Tyler he was trying to hit you, which I suspect you wouldn't need that to tell a person who was almost trying to be hit. It almost seems like a defense ready-made to be drawn up. So myself and Gene Rossi, at least, many times, I got Francey Hakes with me, but with Gene, I've talked a lot about whether or not a defendant should take a stand. We saw in the Jason Van Dyke trial out of Chicago how he got obliterated, made a horrible witness, and without any question in our minds was a major reason why he got convicted. Well, Roy Oliver, who chose not to do an opening statement, or his lawyer chose not to do an opening statement, so all the jury hearing now is cross-examination of various witnesses, but they decide to make the crucial decision to put Roy Oliver on the stand. Let's take a look to see how that went.
Situation, you assess it for one, what it is, and two, for what it might be. In other words, it could be a dangerous situation.
Yes.
Was there anything about those young adults and you going in that house that gave you the feeling that this was a dangerous situation?
No, not at all.
Were you amazed the number of people were coming out of that place?
I was very amazed by that.
Did you follow Gross into the house?
After a second or two, after he made entry into the house, and I stayed outside to where I was close enough to hear if he started yelling, but I was outside to where I watched the partygoers disperse. They weren't causing any issues. They were dispersing. They don't need to stay out there. Went there to be closer to Officer Gross.
Well, what was your job while you were at the house?
I just did a quick officer safety check of the house, make sure no one was hiding, make sure there's no alcohol since it was alleged intoxicated juveniles, make sure no alcohol that was hidden, thrown in corners, someone that was intoxicated to where they passed out and needed medical aid. I was just doing a quick look around.
What happened next?
After I conducted a quick little look around, checked the backyard, and got next to Gross, then we heard gunshots.
Well, you heard, what did you think you heard?
Gunshots.
And you've heard plenty of gunshots, haven't you?
Yes.
You've heard plenty of semi-automatic weapons being fired.
Yes, sir, I have.
So what was your impression?
Roy Oliver testifying. As I know my guests know, cops are given a wide latitude of discretion with regard to the use of lethal force. Francey, one of my guests here today, was indicating that, and we were talking, it doesn't necessarily have to be right in hindsight. It just needs to be reasonable at the time the officers were confronting the circumstances before them. But when you get on that witness stand and you testify, you are locked into your testimony on direct and cross-examination. He has us up to right now hearing the gunshot fired while he was inside of the house that these kids were in, where there was underage drinking going on. Here's the gunshots, but now let's listen to his testimony about what he does after he hears the gunshots.
Was that the training that you had?
Yes, it was.
Did you have a sling on the weapon, right?
Yes, I did.
Okay, what happened next?
I am walking basically the same path that Gross has taken. I've got the rifle slung, or I'm about to sling it, and then he gets on the radio, and I know Gross. I've worked Gross many years. He gets on the radio, call out a license plate. You do that. I know you do that because you want dispatch to know what car you are trying to stop, have suspicions about. There's some reason you want that license plate. Of all the cars he's passed, he hasn't called out any license plates. He calls out this one. His tone of voice is not the Officer Gross that I'm familiar with. His pitch goes up.
Did you hear him tell that first vehicle to stop where you are?
I heard him yelling and giving commands. I couldn't tell exactly what he was saying, but I had a general idea.
Well, did you see that vehicle stop and follow his command?
Yes, I had to walk around that vehicle.
And were the people in that car?
Yes, there were.
Did they move?
They did not.
Because they were told to stop and stay right where they are?
Correct.
Then what happened next?
I look up to see exactly where he is at now, and he is focused on one vehicle, and he is walking at a decent pace. He's not running. He's not walking. He is walking at a good, decent pace towards his car, yelling at the top of his lungs, adding, I think, what we've determined as salty language at this point.
That's pretty typical.
In high-stress situations, that has a tendency to come out.
Did you think at that point that Gross was, his perception was this was a high-stress, dangerous situation?
By the tone of voice he used on the radio calling out the license plate, and by using the salty language, that told me this is a very, he's seen something, not sure what it is, but he is locked onto this car, and my hearing and my eyesight is telling me he's intent on this car. There's something going on with this car, and I've got to get out there to help him with it.
Well, would it be fair to say that you were basically following his lead?
Yes, he was setting and dictating the pace on everything. I'm just there to support him on whatever it is he needs.
Why did you start to run, as we saw on the video?
Because his voice changed on the radio, that high pitch that told me he had something that was making his body react in a way that he was not comfortable. So I needed to get up to him really fast.
Okay, so that's Roy Oliver. Francey, something that I'm noting with the way he's testifying, he's indicating, and these are the little nuances that an audio tape, a videotape don't necessarily get to. That his fellow officers yelling out the license plate number, which was a little unusual for him, that his voice was elevated, that he was yelling, that another vehicle did follow commands. Tyler, the other officer, was focused on one motor vehicle, yelling at the top of his lungs, and that he's cursing, which indicated to him was a high-intensity situation, that he was focused on that vehicle for a reason, the tone of his voice, that he must have seen something because Tyler was intent on his car, and that's what made him intent on his car. So let's talk about the idea of what cops do for a living, right? They're in a high-stress situation, and then all of a sudden they're confronting this, and he's telling you about, beyond what that videotape shows, all the other factors he's taking into consideration based on how he knows other law enforcement officers respond.
Well, that's right. I mean, Bob, you've got about, I don't know, maybe 10 seconds where you've got gunfire, people screaming, the cops running out of the house and toward the gunfire, trying to figure out who's shooting at whom. He hears his partner yelling at the top of his lungs. He sees a vehicle not obeying his partner's commands, and then he hears glass breaking. He doesn't know what his partner has seen with his light inside the car. Maybe his partner's seen a weapon being drawn. He doesn't know. And so when he sees that car fail to obey demands and he hears the glass breaking, he fires. Again, the jury decided that that was wrong. But I understand why the officer made the split-second decision that he did. A jury didn't think it was reasonable, but I don't know.
Yeah, Gene Rossi, well, this was a very debated case by people who were saying that this was a much different scenario, and we're going to be doing this at the 3 to 5 hour, but I got to jump into it, Gene. We were talking about this off camera, and you wanted me to throw a question. I think it's a good one. Compare that and what Francey said, as well as the testimony of Oliver versus Van Dyke.
All right. Number one, Van Dyke was just a horrible witness for himself in his case. Officer Oliver seems very reasonable, and I think he's looking at the jury, and when he's looking at the jury, it doesn't seem phony. He was comfortable in his own skin in explaining what he did. Contrast that with Van Dyke. And the other thing is, the video, now that I understand the angles, the video corroborates to some extent what Officer Oliver is saying. Contrast that with the Van Dyke video, which was 180 degrees different than what Van Dyke said. So those are the two comparisons between their testimonies.
We've talked about this, guys, before. I'm not certain if you tried this case, not Van Dyke, but the Oliver case, to 5 different juries, you couldn't get 5 different results based upon how powerful the law is for the officers, but I don't think they were ever going to overcome it. We know this as trial lawyers, guys, the jury psychology of a 15-year-old boy where he was just firing rounds into a vehicle, that they were going to do something that was going to be anything less than a conviction in the case because an innocent boy was killed. At least that's my feel as to what this jury did. And we're going to get to the sentence, which I think is interesting and may very well reflect that point of view. So we will do that. However, Gene, Francey, you ready for this? At the other end of the break. Well, welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. My name is Bob Bianchi. I'm flying solo on the earpiece, but that's okay because we are going in a Law and Crime rewind on today, covering the Roy Oliver case. I'll be covering more of a different case later on in the afternoon because I'll be here at 3. I got Gene Rossi with me, Francey Hakes, an amazing case. But guys, let's listen to some more testimony of Roy Oliver because I think obviously this is going to be the centerpiece of the defense case. I think by all estimations so far, myself and my guests feel he's doing a pretty good job.
Dr. Hayden said it was 9 seconds up to where the shooting actually occurred, and then the shooting decisions and all was that fast. Can you clap your hands as fast as they're talking about?
No, I cannot.
Are you surprised at Dr. Hayden and all these reports as to how quickly an officer has to make that decision?
They're very surprising.
Did you ever go through Force Science and study all of this and everything?
No. We get a brief couple hours on it in the police academy about action, reaction, how to cut that down to save our lives, but we don't get into the science.
Well, when do you think you made the decision to fire that weapon?
When the vehicle was moving towards my partner.
Did you hear something happen when the vehicle was moving towards your partner?
I heard some type of possible gunshot from inside the car, but that was after the thing was coming to my partner. And
Well, it all happened that fast, but was that a factor that you put into the computer to tell your brain that you got a dangerous situation in your head?
Possibly. I had a lot of information to process real fast, and I almost watched my partner get hit by a car.
When you made that decision, when you made the decision to act, were you trying to stop a vehicle?
I was trying to stop threats towards my partner, towards anyone out there.
Well, did you intentionally shoot into that vehicle?
Yes.
Well, let me ask you something, Roy. We're going to talk more about up and down because they've shown all these videos. But after you fired those 5 shots, do you agree with Dr. Hayden and all these other pros that came in here and said the 5th shot hit the rocket panel or the concrete first?
I really can't. I mean, there's a possibility that it could.
But after your decision was to stop shooting, what do you do with the weapon at that point?
After you've completed the interval, whatever you're doing, your rifle, your thumb places it on safe, and you lower the barrel to a lower position.
Well, what was your immediate thoughts after you fired the weapon?
Make sure my partner was okay.
What did you say to him? Do you remember? What did you think that just happened?
I thought he was about to get run over or at least got clipped by the car. At bare minimum.
I think the text says you said, "Are you all right?"
I know I checked on him. I just don't remember my exact wording. I want to make sure he was okay.
Okay, Roy Oliver testifying there. Gene, he's basically indicating there he's shooting into the motor vehicle to stop threats to his partner. 5 shots. Afterwards, he places it in a safe mode and lowers the weapon so it's not an imminent threat to anybody. And his only immediate thought is his partner okay? But that all presupposes, and we listened to the partner testify, that the partner was in danger. Is the defense argument here that this was just even if the partner says he wasn't in danger, it was a terrible perception mistake?
Absolutely. He said I had a lot of information to sift through. That's his defense, that you have about 5 to 10 seconds of what I observed, not Officer Gross. Chaotic. It's a crisis. I had to make a split-second decision. He did, I think, say, I thought I heard a shot from the car, and it could have been the glass. And that's all good for him. My only complaint is this, and Van Dyke had a little bit of this problem. I don't know if he was prepped a lot, number one, because he kind of paused and hesitated in some of his answers. And number two, and this is the thing with police officers, they got to show a little softness. You know, he was too mechanical in the last couple of questions. And I don't know if the jury reacted positively to that. He didn't really seem to be emotionally engaged in that moment. That's my one complaint.
So, Francey, what do you think about the idea that you spoke about before, that the cops are actually running to the danger? It's pandemonium. The car is not following officer commands, even though they had an explanation in the car as to why they didn't do that. The fact is, this is what is being perceived by Oliver, and that he believes his partner is in danger and he's shooting inside this vehicle. Do you think he would have been better with a bench trial as opposed to a jury trial, like has happened in other cases that we've covered on the Law&Crime Network?
That's a great point, Bob. I think he probably would have, to try to take some of the emotion out of this. I think that police body cams, while they're very important and everyone talks a lot about them, and they certainly can be useful in almost every situation, but here it almost does a disservice to the true nature of the scene, the chaotic nature of what is happening and the perception of the officer on trial, because that jury would have seen that body cam footage over and over. It would have been slowed down, shown to them in slow motion repeatedly. It takes the chaos right out. And so it's almost impossible for the defense attorney to truly put the jury in the position of this officer who's on trial. And I don't know that that is a completely fair situation for him to be in. And just really quickly, to Gene's point, they should have had him in a sweater. That's why they put defendants in sweaters all the time in capital cases, to make them look non-threatening and softer. A gray suit and a white shirt, big mistake.
You know, I just want to take this on a personal level. I get to do that when I'm sitting in this chair. You know what the best thing about Christmas was for me?
You got a Christmas sweater?
No, that the day after I was going to be able to open up the presents of Francey Hakes and my man Gene Rossi to break these cases down, because you guys are bringing home some awesome points that I think are really important. So we're going to take a break. We're going to come back. We're doing a Law&Crime rewind on these cop cases, so stick with us. We're going to circle back and cover all of this. That was Roy Oliver on cross-examination. Now, as part of the prosecution case, if you listen to Oliver carefully, he's being asked questions about policies, about procedures, about use of force policies, how they are trained. And in any case like this, the prosecution would be malfeasant. They would be doing a poor job if they did not get a use of force expert. Of course, in this case, they did. Philip Hayden was that person. Let's take a look, and I'll be back with my guests on the other end.
I believe that using deadly force was reasonable under the circumstances.
I did.
And what was that opinion?
My opinion that a reasonable officer would not have done that. And my reason for that is because as they were approaching, there's about a 9-second point from where Officer Oliver retrieves his rifle to the point he gets to the shot is fired. During that point in time, it has been mentioned that the eye is better than the video, that you can see more. And I would agree with that. You can. As he's running, or both of them are walking at the time, and coming up in this 9 seconds, there's a lot of time that Officer Oliver has to look over at Officer Gross and see what he's doing. He can see well, he can see Officer Gross approaching this vehicle. Officer Gross is walking towards this vehicle. The vehicle's not coming towards him, he's walking towards the vehicle. At that point in time, he starts to pick up his pace, and he ends up getting to the vehicle about the same time, or getting close to the vehicle about the same time that Officer Gross gets to the back window, and the back window is broken. A fraction of a second is when Officer Gross is by that window. Now, with Officer Oliver coming up on that at that time, he had plenty of time to see that Officer Gross was not in danger, that Officer Gross was a distance from the car, from the back wheel, and he was walking towards that. So he had plenty of time to understand he's not in danger. As he's coming up on that vehicle, what happens at that point in time, he doesn't look, or he does look, and I don't know what he says he's doing at that point in time. But an example that we used to use in a training with our officers is that I'd say, take two fingers and put them up about a foot apart from each other and look at one finger. Can you clearly see the other finger? He won't be able to. It's blurry. Why? Because you're looking in your peripheral vision. When you're looking in your peripheral vision, you cannot obtain information that you need. You have to turn your head or turn your eyes at least to that point to where you're able to see it. That's a time constraint, because moving your eyes just from this point to this point, looking from my finger to this finger, it takes about 0.2 of a second to look over, to look back. If I focus, look from this finger to this finger, and I focus on it, it takes even more time. So you're talking about, for anybody in Officer Oliver's position there, to look over at that instant in time and see what's happening to Officer Gross, it would have taken a good half a second to 3/4 of a second. What we saw in the video is that if he would have done that and come back on what he was looking at on target, let's say, is that that vehicle would have been past him. The vehicle would have never been in front of him. So there's no way at that point in time when the window was broken that he could say, I looked over and saw that he was in danger and then looked back and engaged the target. Not enough time to do that. So that's why I'm saying that there was no threat to Officer Gross at any time. He says so. And I don't see anything in the videos that show it to be a threat. So I don't believe that Officer Oliver would have seen it as a threat. So he shot at that point in time. That's why I say it was excessive force. It was not necessary because no crime had been committed that would have brought that deadly force to bear. Because deadly force is only used if you have to defend yourself, defend another, and you have to look at this thing. It's a terrible thing you have to use. But if you have to use it, you better use it. And you better use it right.
Welcome back. Okay, we're in the Roy Oliver case out of Texas. Police officer, you guys know the case. We were able to crystallize all the important testimony. They were out on a stupid kids drinking in a house party routine. Shots are fired outside at an unrelated incident at a nursing home. These cops don't know. They go running outside. Pandemonium's breaking up. And the victim, as you see the pictures of this young man, was in a vehicle with 4 other teenage boys. There's all sorts of confusion as to whether when they were backing their vehicle up. There was an officer that was close by. He didn't feel the need. He didn't feel he was in danger, but Roy Oliver felt that he was in danger. Is he right? Is he wrong? He fires inside the vehicle, killing a passenger, 15-year-old boy who had nothing to do, nor did any of those other young men, with anything involving the shooting that they had heard when the cops were inside of that house party trying to break up the illegal drinking. So there you go. You had experts. You had the defendant testify. You can't get better trials than it would be covered here on the Law&Crime Network because it's got it all. I've been breaking it down with Francey Hakes and Gene Rossi. And then the time comes with every case where it's time to pucker up and wait for the verdict. Let's take a look.
City Bailiff, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
I have those, Mr. Gill, Mr. Oliver, Mr. Brissett, Mr. Lane. If you would please rise for the reading of the verdict. This is cause number F1718595-V, the state of Texas versus Roy Oliver. The verdict form reads as follows. We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant guilty of murder as charged in the indictment. Signed by the presiding juror. Mr. Janacek, is that your signature?
Yes, sir.
Members of the jury, if that is your individual verdict, if you would please signify so by raising your right hand. Please let the record reflect that all 12 members of the jury did raise their right hand. Cause number F1700576-V and F1700579. Verdict forms read as follows. F1700576. We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant not guilty. There's a signature here. Mr. Janacek, is that your signature?
Yes, sir.
And does that signify your unanimous verdict?
Yes, sir.
Members of the jury, if that is your individual verdict, would you please signify so by raising your right hand? Let the record reflect that all 12 members of the jury raise their hand. F1700579. We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant not guilty. There's a spot here where it appears that you have your signature, Mr. Janacek.
Yes, sir.
And there's also a spot where a part of it is scratched out, but you've written a note at the bottom. We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant not guilty, and that's your signature too, is that right? Members of the jury, if that's your individual verdict, would you please signify so by raising your right hand? Please let the record reflect that all, I'm sorry. Thank you. Please let the record reflect that all 12 members of the jury did in fact raise their right hand. Mr. Oliver, Mr. Gill, Mr. Brissett, Mr. Lane, you all may be seated. It's customary in our law and our procedure to take a break at this point, so if you would please go back with the sheriffs and await further instructions. All rise for the jury.
You know, Francey, I don't know. There are times, and I prosecuted for so many cases and convicted so many people, and it is what it is. But there are certain times, and tell me, why am I feeling kind of bad for this guy? Now, I mean, the death of this kid was a horrible tragedy that he had nothing to do with, to no fault of his own, and I understand the principles of justice, and I'm not saying the verdict was unfair, but I don't even know how the guy stands up. Cop now going to jail. What are your thoughts?
You know, it's funny you say that, Bob, because I was thinking the exact same thing when the verdict was read. I can only imagine that if that happened to me and I was just convicted of murder, I would collapse. I can't imagine that you can just stand up. I think you're feeling bad for him the same reason I am in a way. While the loss of Jordan Edwards is incredibly tragic, he was a young man cut down for literally no reason, for nothing that he did. He was completely innocent. And I think that is the reason that the jury wanted accountability, because someone had to pay for this loss of life. And the scene was just chaotic enough, and the other officer's testimony just damning enough to make the jury decide that Oliver was in the wrong.
Gene, you've taken down a lot of defendants in your close to 3 decades down there at the DOJ, and I have too. And there are some where you're satisfied you did your professional job, you believe that the verdict was correct based upon the law and the facts, but there are just some kind of defendants sometimes where you just have an inkling every now and again, like, wow, that person's really going to go through heck or hell because of a momentary split-second bad decision, as opposed to a lot of people that we prosecute that just represent continuing dangers to the community and not only wanted to do it, but if given an opportunity would do it again. What are your emotional thoughts?
Well, the thing about this case is there's no evidence that after this incident he tried to cover it up, he tried to persuade others to submit false reports, arguably in the Van Dyke trial. The video has a plethora of red flags and loud gongs that would help an officer defend himself against this shooting. It was a split-second decision. His testimony was not great, but it was adequate. What I don't understand is this. How's he acquitted of 2 counts of aggravated assault and found guilty of murder?
I agree.
What that tells me is the jury compromised. They wanted to throw 2 counts to show the defense they did a great job. But it goes back to what Francey said. When you have a victim like Jonathan Edwards, who looks like just a kid that would go on a Christmas card, they have to find someone guilty.
And of course, that is not what jurors are supposed to do, but that is you are supposed to do without passion, prejudice, sympathy, bias for one side or the other. Guys, I'll make a prediction here in 2019. This may be a case you see come back. I don't know why I got that feeling, but on appeal, you may see it come back. In this case also, let's talk about the collateral consequences to the family, because Ingrid had testified in the sentencing about how this would affect their autistic children that would no longer have a father. And it was pretty compelling information. You can't help but feel bad for those folks. Let's go to the sentencing.
Mr. Gill, Mr. Brissett, Mr. Oliver, Mr. Lane, Mr. Thompson, if you would please rise. The verdict form reads as follows. Cause number F1718595, the State of Texas versus Roy Oliver, in the 292nd Judicial District Court here in Dallas County, Texas. We, the jury, having found the defendant Roy Oliver guilty of murder and having made a negative finding on the special issue of sudden passion, assess the defendant's punishment at imprisonment in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for a term of 15 years and a fine of $10,000. Mr. Janacek, members of the jury, if that is your individual verdict, would you please signify so by raising your right hand? Please let the record reflect that all 12 members of the jury did in fact raise their right hand. Mr. Gill, is there any lawful reason why a client should not now be formally sentenced?
There's not.
Very good. Roy Oliver, the jury having found you guilty, and the court has accepted your guilty finding, has accepted the finding of guilt by the jury unanimously as charged in the indictment for the offense of murder. It's now the order, judgment, and decree of this court that you be taken by the sheriff of Dallas County and by her safely held until you're turned over to an authorized receiving agent for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Institutional Division, where you shall be confined for a period of 15 years and assessed a fine of $10,000. That sentence will begin today, but you will be given credit for all of your back time in this case. You may have it.
There you go. So he was convicted, and the jury recommended, and the judge imposed 15 years. It could have been a lot more, and I think a lot of that has to do with the idea that they kind of saw that this wasn't really the worst case in the world. I got to sign my two great guests off. Gene, Francey, thank you so much. You're awesome. We're going to be right back. You stay tuned.